ravages entire landscapes around the world. Everywhere are burned to a crisp. It's a living nightmare for those trapped, unable to run.
I think this community walked into hell and somehow walked out the other side.
When flames rip across the world's continents, they can destroy everything in their path on our raging planet. Since before the dawn of man, there have been natural wildfires in our forests. As life on our planet evolved, it learned to coexist with fire. Some trees have such thick fireproof bark that even if flames devour their foliage, their trunks survive to flourish again next year. There are three main types of wildfire. Forest fires are huge but slow because there is little undergrowth to fuel them. But once the tops of the trees ignite, the intensity of the fire soars. The second type, brush fires, burn open land with low-lying vegetation. Twigs and grass dry out easily and burn fiercely. They spread more quickly, but burn less hot than forest fires. The third type, grass fires, spread very fast, at up to 60 miles per hour. They burn intensely, but briefly, and the temperatures are relatively low. But the worst of all fires are the Australian eucalyptus fires. The trees are so rich in flammable oils that the atmosphere around them becomes almost explosive. The hot air in the fire center rises, and new air is sucked in. This wind fans the flames, creating a self-perpetuating, uncontrollable firestorm. Fire actually helped humanity spread across the world. To the first Australians, fire was a tool to be used. They could create it at will and cook food with it, hugely extending their diet. And they burned dried up areas to encourage new green growth that would attract game. Fire was also important in their spiritual lives. It was a friend to be praised. In modern Australia, unlike prehistoric times, fire is a danger, not a blessing. We have always needed fire, but although we can create it, we can never fully control it. These are the suburbs of Sydney on New Year's Day, 1994. The summer had been very dry. Much of the state was on fire alert, and on New Year's Day, the worst happened. gathering man, but to urban society, it's a deadly enemy. Hundreds of homes were burned to the ground. 4 people died in the flames. On the volcanic islands of Hawaii, fires are often caused by lava flows. The tropical forest is generally too damp to burn, but the intense volcanic heat allows fire to take hold. Most wildfires occur in 2 broad belts around the planet, one north, one south. America is in the northern belt. Every year as spring arrives, the wildfires begin. With a small wildfire, with flames only 4 feet high, trained firefighters can put it out using hand tools. The biggest challenge is to get the firefighters there before the flames can spread and grow. Since fires often occur in remote areas, the best way to go is by air. These are the elite firefighters, the smoke jumpers.
All right. We're going at their jump spot right there.
90% of the fires they jump to are less than 1/10 of an acre.
Okay. Fire. All right. There you go.
Although the fires are small, smoke jumping is extremely dangerous. Smoke jumpers are entirely on their own. Even so, they manage to control 9 out of 10 fires they are dropped on. Once the flames grow to 8 feet high, then firefighters need more support. Now, to be successful, they need road access, a fire engine, and pressure hoses. To fight fires with large flames, you need air power. Big helicopters, little helicopters, firefighters. There may be thousands on a single fire. It's organized like a war with military precision.
Our plan is to soften the fire up with the helicopters where we can get in and work it. Our number one goal, first and foremost, is always not to get anybody hurt. Safety. There's nothing out there worth getting hurt over.
Every year, the first fires begin in the southern United States. In 1996, the winter in Texas had been dry, and the spring was hot. By late March, there was a drought. What remained of last year's vegetation was dry as tinder.
We do have some resources available that are not normally available to this part of the state. As we speak, the air attack plane is coming in. Right now, what we're thinking is there's a kind of a breach in the line over there on the southeast corner where it goes into the river. We're probably going to start some work over there.
To most of us, fires are things to be put out, but wildfires are often too big to attack directly. Instead, firefighters must starve them of their fuel. They're wetting the grass, not the burning area, and eventually the fire will die.
I think we're in pretty good shape north of where we've done this backfire. I'm just worried about the river up.
Looks like a crossing here on that river, right? Okay, right there's where the left.
Start from the river and head north as far as you can go.
Sometimes firefighters deliberately set fire to the grass to burn out areas of fuel in front of the main fire, so they can eventually starve it to death. The air tankers are not trying to put the fire out directly, but to stop it from spreading. Bulldozers are used to cut a fire line, scraping the grass and fuel off the surface, to leave a strip of bare earth that the fire can't jump across. There is a natural shape to the wildfire year in America. It starts in the south and moves north with the hot, dry weather. After the Texas brush fires in the spring of 1996, by midsummer, the great forests of Yosemite National Park were very dry and at risk. The fuel was there. All that was needed was the spark. On the 14th of August, it came.
I got the call about 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd heard the grumblings in the distance of the lightning and kept telling myself, well, it's out in the valley. It's not up on the forest. Tom Rawls called me and said he'd been up to Smith Peak and could see 5 glows in the night.
Glows in the night meant lightning fire. Firefighters began arriving at dawn. Rob Delmas and Marianne Harding rappelled down from the helicopter onto the biggest of the fires.
We had 4 smokes that we saw, but more reports were coming in, so we knew we were going to be stretched pretty thin. Yeah, this is kind of the thing we wait for. This is what our summer's all about, and this is what we train for. So we were all very excited.
Working fire is just an odd business because you're excited out there, but you know the dangers. You get your adrenaline going, and it's kind of intense.
Rappelling works like smoke jumping. If they can get to the fire early enough, even with nothing other than hand tools, they may be able to control it. In this case, they couldn't. The first ground crew got to the fire on foot at 10:02.
We could see across the hill. It looked like it was about 3 acres. We could see open flame. Felt like it had the potential to get large.
And it did. By noon, it covered 5 acres. By 2:30, 10 acres. Their first job was to cut a line, a strip of cleared bare earth to slow the fire's progress.
We were going up the hill, and then pretty soon we were going side hill because the fire was moving quicker than we could cut line.
And you could just tell it was getting out of hand. I think about by noon, they said, okay, we've lost it. It's too hot and dangerous. They just sent the pull off.
By now, 11 separate fires were burning in the area. They needed reinforcements. Over the next 14 days, 3,500 firefighters were flown in from as far away as Alaska and Puerto Rico. A tented town sprang up. Even though the fire camp was several miles from the edge of the fire, the crews lived and worked under an oppressive cloud of smoke. Everything they needed had to come with them. Kitchens, laundries, paramedics, telephones. Everything to support the firefighters on the front line had to be brought in. The first task was to try to keep the fire from spreading. That meant cutting miles of fire line.
We need a lot of highs and everything down this area.
Where they could use existing roads as fire line, they did, and stood guard against the fire just beyond the hill. From the air, one fire line is so narrow, it's barely visible. A fire could jump it even with only a moderate wind. There is an easier way to cut fire lines, as this instructional film shows. It's simply a matter of connecting some wires and pushing a button. And they've just built some first-class fire line. Bulldozers also cut fire lines quickly, but the firefighters are not allowed to use them in the national parks, for obvious reasons. Day 5 of the fire. It was now 7,500 acres and growing. The individual fires had now merged into a single super fire. They called it the Ackerson Fire. It was to become that year's largest forest fire.
What are we going to have today? Good morning. Again, today we're going to have 5 Type 1 helicopters in support of the western edge of the fire. In working lines today, just another safety item is heads up on these heavy lift helicopters, dropping 15 to 2,000 gallons of water, rolling rocks, tree limbs. Just be heads up. Thank you.
Day 6. This was the day they began to fight back. Late that afternoon, in Cherry Creek, the fire started to burn fiercely. All 5 heavy-lift Sky Crane helicopters were brought in. These giants can suck up water direct from the nearby rivers and lakes. It takes just 30 seconds to draw up 2,000 gallons of water. Alongside those work the big bucket helicopters. They can refill just as quickly, but their capacity is 50% less. An air attack controller circled high above, coordinating air and ground crews.
Let's pick out some targets that are probably the most threatening to start with, and we'll just work it back towards the jam, I guess. Okay, copy. Yeah, I just want to know, let you know it's going to get a little busy over here in a little bit.
As usual, as the day wore on, the air temperature rose and reinforced the fire. By this time, it had spread to over 13,000 acres. At this stage, only 10% of the fire was contained by fire line. By 5 p.m., the blaze was so intense in Cherry Creek that the firefighters in the valley had to be evacuated.
Rock group, air attack on Shannon.
Day 12. The fire now covered 32,000 acres.
They want to hold this whole road now. Here and there. So we're looking at... we'll be switching in and out on the burners tonight.
Jeff, or I guess Jeff's going to be way inside. Rick's going to be on the outside.
In the cool of night, fires die down a little. Firefighters take advantage of this to set their own fires under controlled conditions. They deliberately set fires to widen the fire line, to burn out 50 to 100 yards more of forest inside the line between them and the wildfire. To show just how savage these fires can be, we positioned a camera encased in a fireproof aluminum box so we could see up the trunk of a burning tree. It took only a minute for the tree to burn. When they took out the camera, it was almost too hot to hold.
Is it running? Are you running? It's still running. It's still running. Right. The box is history.
Aluminum melts at 1,200 degrees.
I think it's really necessary that we have these safety zones.
Day 13. The morning shift must plan not only how to combat the fire, but also how to ensure the safety of all the men and women fighting it.
Each crew knows where these safety zones are and approximately the distance to them.
A safety zone is an area big enough to withdraw to, where the fire cannot reach you, even if you're completely surrounded. In Idaho in 1994, 125 firefighters were forced to retreat to their safety zone, a small airstrip. As the fire surrounded them, they calmly burned out the grass. If the fire did reach them, it would have very little to feed on. Then they quietly sat in the ashes and waited. Thankfully, they all survived unharmed. In the fire that swept up Storm King Mountain, Colorado in July of 1994, 14 firefighters died. In that 1 year alone, 35 people lost their lives fighting fires across America. By now, the Ackerson fire had been spreading for 14 days. It had grown to cover 41,000 acres. Only half of it was under control. More hotshot crews were mobilized. The Flathead crew from Montana had come straight from fighting another fire. The number of firefighters had finally reached its peak. The Flathead hotshots had driven all day. Now they needed to pitch their tents and get what sleep they could, because by 6 a.m. they were due out on the fire line.
Thanks for being here on time. Welcome to Wednesday morning. Let's get an update to Joe, our weather.
Good morning. We're going to have high pressure build into the area today. What that means for us is winds at the ridge tops will not be as strong as they have been the last couple of days. In addition to that, we have an inversion this morning.
Every morning there was a temperature inversion. The smoke-filled cold, heavy air sat low, creating a dense smog that filled your lungs. It meant that the air crews could not see to drop their loads. On this day, air operations were completely grounded. When the Flathead hotshots headed out to the fire at 6 a.m., it was not morning mist they drove through, it was smoke. Their task was a daytime burnout in the Cherry Creek Valley. Before they could move off, the crew weather observer had to check the humidity. Below 20%, and the fire would catch and burn more fiercely.
Come back to the junction where we were talking and bring the other fields over with you.
This burnout was intended to widen and strengthen the fire line so that the fire was trapped with nowhere to go.
Yeah, so hopefully it'll come up about 1,200 feet.
By now, the fire covered 45,000 acres. One of the biggest problems facing a fire commander anywhere is knowing what is actually happening under the smoke. An infrared camera in a helicopter can provide that information. Each morning, once the smoke is lifted enough for the pilot to find his way, the chopper flies along the fire line. The infrared camera can see right through the smoke. It easily picks out flames. They show white, and even hot spots, which may burn later in the day. Everything is recorded, and the information is added to the master fire map. Every day, the map is updated with as much information as possible.
Little hash marks are symbology that shows where the fire edge is.
It comes from helicopter reconnaissance, from the ground crews, and from the infrared camera. Many lives could depend on the accuracy of this map. And each morning a new one is issued at the 5 a.m. briefing.
Okay, good morning. We're going to start looking up here to the north off of Lake Eleanor and determine what we're going to do coming between the two lakes, Lake Eleanor and Hetch Hetchy, and start going direct, indirect as we can and try to tie the two together and close off that upper portion.
The wind was driving the fire northeast towards a string of lakes, Cherry Lake, Lake Eleanor, and Lake Hetch Hetchy. The plan was to use them as a block, and if the lakes could be linked with strong fire line, there would be no way the fire could get through. It was going to be tough. Parts of the area were remote, and many of the crews would need to be supplied by air. Was crucial in gaining control of the fire. If they could block it off at the lakes, they were close to having it under control. It was time for the big gun. The air tanker's water is mixed with fire retardant. It evaporates slower and penetrates deeper. The red dye helps pilots keep track of which areas they've treated. In France, fires are frequent on the dry Mediterranean coast. The sea is always close by. In many other parts of the world, the water tankers have a different design. These are Canadairs. They scoop up water from the sea without ever landing. They take on 5 tons of water in just 8 seconds. In Yosemite, the fire was still spreading. It now covered an area of 46,000 acres. The crews estimated it would take them 6 more days to bring it under control. By now, the firefighters were defending 45 miles of fire line. Now was the time to reinforce the established fire line.
We're going to start here and work that way. And anything that's within falling distance of the line, and that could catch on fire and fall across the line, we've got to take out.
A tree that falls across the line breaches that line. The fire can run where it likes. Often, many trees must be felled or burnt deliberately to save the rest. Some trees can only be brought down with explosives.
The reason we wrap this tree this way is it's a hazard tree. It's all eaten out on the inside. There's going to be people working in this area, so we want to get it on the ground. It's too dangerous to cut with a chainsaw.
Wherever in the world fires are fought, the weatherman is key. To understand a fire, you must know the weather.
Okay, you ready? Set, go. 253.1, 49.0.
Wind is crucial to a fire spreading. High humidity will slow a fire down.
286.8.
Dry air encourages it to spread. Rain kills it. The weatherman's information decidedly affects the fire commander's plans. And the worst news he can pass on is that high winds are on the way. A small fire in still air is easy to deal with, but add a breeze and it gets more difficult. Back at the Ackerson fire, it was day 17. The smoke cloud rose 20,000 feet into a clear sky. The fire lines were holding. Now the challenge was to help the fire burn itself out. A helicopter dripping a flaming napalm-like gel is a favored way. Now, rather more safely, they also use incendiary ping-pong balls. The incendiary ping-pong balls are filled with potassium permanganate. Just before they're dropped, the dropping machine injects glycol, and by the time they reach the ground, the explosive mixture is ready to ignite. The plan was to burn out areas of forest still standing inside the fire lines, and thus eliminate the danger of the fire starting up again. This was to be the biggest controlled burn of the Ackerson fire. Once the ping-pong ball helicopter was back on the ground, the man who had selected the drop points reported on how it had gone.
First priority was to strengthen the defenses here in V. We dropped a pretty light pattern coming down inside like this.
Couldn't get in here, it's still pretty smoky.
Yeah, I don't think it's wise to go in and burn again this evening.
Okay. We'll just plan it for tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Paul Linz, Flathead Hotshots, please report to DMOB. Paul Linz, Flathead Hotshots, please report to DMOB.
After 19 days, the pressure was off. Some firefighters could leave for a well-earned rest or to fight other fires.
We're going to the Marple Complex, Marple Fire on Cascade Lake, and I got a map.
Day 20. The fire had spread to 57,000 acres, but now 95% of it was trapped inside fire lines. It was time to start cleaning up. Gear was spread over hundreds of square miles. Some of the country was so rough that the best way to carry loads was on mule trains. The mules do minimal damage to the environment of the park. And in just one trip, they recovered several tons of equipment. However careful you are, fighting a fire causes damage to the land. In the Yosemite National Park, they're obliged to clean it up by hand. They call it using a light hand on the land. But in the Stanislaus National Forest, just a few miles away, bulldozers are allowed to do the work. Cutting the stumps will help them rot faster and help the scars of the Ackerson fire to fade away more quickly.
Hey, firefighters. Everybody wants to say thanks.
This is John Eggert, owner of John Sierra Market in Sonora. My wife and I would like to thank all of the firefighters and all...
This is EJ from TCI Cablevision, wanting to thank all the firefighters for protecting our homes and our community.
There are no words to say that firefighters are hot, hot, hot.
A community thanks to you because the cabin cares.
At 6 in the evening of day 22, the fire was declared 100% contained. Inside the fire lines, its remains slowly burned out. It was the biggest forest fire of the year, but the fire season was not yet over. After the long, dry summer, wildfires strike Southern California every fall. The worst are driven by the Santa Ana winds that sweep down from the mountains.
Notify operations at units in Las Flores Canyon. There's a firestorm coming through. All units need to evacuate.
These are brush fires, brief and intense, and potential killers. This is Malibu in 1993. Over the 7-day period of the fire, 323 buildings were lost. 3 people died. It happened there again in the fall of 1996. The fire started in the canyons back from the coast one afternoon in October. It burned fiercely, spreading in the grass and brush, dry as tinder after the long, hot California summer.
You can see the amount of heat they're taking. Look, it's boiling the water right on the road.
By early afternoon, the smoke made it seem like night. Hot embers were blowing downwind, starting new fires in the tinder-dry grass.
We can see that fire across the way there. Captain's going to throw some fusees out here.
What he's doing is trying to quickly burn off the grass between the engines and the fire. If he can remove the fuel, he will slow the fire's advance. It did not work.
Get the hell out of here, man. Get out of here, okay? I want you to go back to the...
Beginning of day 2, this fire burned for 2 full days. Fire's beginning to cook. Firefighters are taking a break. They've been here all night, maybe a couple hours sleep. Many of these firefighters in a few minutes are going to be running for their lives.
The fires were spreading fast. Too fast for some of the engines and firefighters.
This fire's beginning to make a run up this canyon that we call Malibu. Right at this time, a strike team was going across the Mid-Slope Road. It's entrapped. And they're entrapped in that right now where you see all that tremendous amount of energy coming out. Several firefighters are going to be burned. And we're looking at some home video we can see several engines backing out here along with the strike team leader. There are 2 engines caught mid-slope, and they're being impacted by flame and heat, and 5 firefighters are being burned, one of them critically.
5,000 acres burned. 5 houses and 3 mobile homes were destroyed. Fortunately, this time nobody was killed, but 11 people were injured. It was the first of many violent fires that ravaged Southern California over the next 1.5 months. At the same time as the Malibu fire was burning, 120 miles to the south, the most destructive fire of the year had started at Harmony Grove. Harmony Grove is, or was, a community of expensive homes not far north of San Diego. The fire started on Monday, October the 21st, probably caused by a spark from a power line.
I panicked. I got a little nervous.
Did you pack any stuff?
Yeah, I packed everything. Everything that was valuable.
Did you guys evacuate?
No, we pretty much stayed in the area and tried to help out and watch where the hot spots were, and we're kind of touring the streets and picking up hoses where we could.
The fire, driven by strong Santa Ana winds, tore down the hillside, catching the townsfolk utterly by surprise. It burned for just 4 hours, but by the next morning, 127 homes had been destroyed. 1 person died. When Bill Kenny made his first visit to his burnt house, he picked through the ashes and found the silver dollar his father had given him.
Silver dollars, 360, whatever it was, 1800s. Good. This was.
After Harmony Grove came the San Bernardino fire. In the middle of the night, a tinder dry hillside went up. In the extreme dry conditions, the fire spread fast, with flames 200 feet high. Every year around the world, wildfires bring terror and leave tragedy in their wake. It's understandable that we should seek to control such a terrifying natural power. Yet some experts think it might be wiser sometimes to let nature take its course. 10 years ago, huge fires ripped through Yellowstone National Park. At the height of the fires, there were nearly 10,000 firefighters. The one tangible achievement for all their heroic labor was to save the park's famous Old Faithful Lodge. But now there was a widely held view that all the firefighters' efforts did not save one single acre of forest, nor did they shorten the fires by a single day. Some critics make the argument that the Yellowstone authorities had made their own problems. For years, they had been putting out most of the fires. So as the trees got older, died, and fell, with no fires to burn them, huge levels of potential fuel had built up. Eventually, the terrible drought year arrived, and Yellowstone burned, completely out of control. In the end, the fires were finally extinguished in November by the first snows of winter. Biologists now know that fire is natural and can be a good thing. That evolution has devised ways of coping with fire shows it's been part of the environment since the Earth was young. It is part of nature. So, if Fires are part of the natural landscape. Why, if they're not threatening people, do we put them out? The question is now being asked worldwide. More and more firefighters take the view that wildfires should be, where possible, allowed to burn themselves out naturally. The biggest problem arises where people and forests overlap. Without people, fires are no problem. But people and fires don't mix. The combination can be deadly on our raging planet.
All fires coming down!